Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to have Andrea Pitzer back on the show, a journalist, author of the book One Long Night, A Global History of Concentration Camps. She has a newsletter and her book you can find at andreapitzer.com. Andrea, thanks for being back on.
Thanks for having me back again, Dean, although unfortunate for the same reason that we have to speak here.
It's rare that there's good news on this show in the time of Trump. The only time on Friday we have some comedic segments. So sometimes besides that, you were on last year. We talked about an MSNBC op-ed you wrote about don't call alligator Alcatraz, call it a concentration camp. So I wanted to start with that. Tell people again, what is a concentration camp?
So a concentration camp is the mass detention of civilians. So not prisoners of war. We're talking everyday people, not at war. So mass detention of civilians without due process or real trial on the basis of identity. So something about who they are is what makes them a target. So that could be race, ethnicity, religion, political affiliation. And it is almost always done for the expansion of political power and political entrenchment of authoritarian leadership.
And did you make there's no due process in it? The idea just round people up, put them in a camp, and it's open-ended detention?
Yeah. And so that's the thing, is that in every system I looked at, and I've looked at systems around the world, 6 continents, more than 130 years at this point, in every single system, these kinds of camps, this kind of detention was done as an end run around whatever was the existing legal system. Now, some of them were not legal systems you and I would have liked, but they're not always democracies where the camps rise, of course, many other places. But in each case, these kinds of camps and this kind of detention is an end run around whatever was in place, because the person who wants that leader or that party that wants the power doesn't have the patience or can't use the tools at hand. So they try to bring something bigger that won't have due process, that allows indefinite detention. And this is why we see people turn to it again and again, because systems have a way of slowing people down. And this is a way to expedite all that stuff and free up a lot of your agents, your law enforcement folks, because the whole idea of the concentration camp, a modern one, is it happened after the invention of and the patenting and the mass production of barbed wire and automatic weapons. So you don't need as many people to hold large numbers of people. And so that's part of the origins of the camps too.
And I'm not sure if you saw the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals on Friday had a really bad ruling. They cited for the Trump regime, and essentially it's open-ended. Anyone they grab who's even been here for 10, 15, 20 years, no criminal records, they can put in their camps, and there's no bail, and they can hold them there until a judge sees them. It could be 6 months, a year, or whatever. So when you look at what's going on right now, before we get into the expansion, because right now there's about 70,000 immigrants in 224 facilities nationwide. Are we at concentration camp status? Are we close to it? Does it depend on the facility and the circumstance of the person?
At this point, we are already in early concentration camp territory. For instance, Nazi Germany, 1933. Most people have heard of Dachau, and Dachau was pulled from an abandoned factory, and it was converted into one of the first Nazi camps. And so we have already seen facilities in towns. We have seen stuff commandeered in small ways, and subcontractors doing this extra detention. We have already seen judicial orders being ignored where they've been issued. We have already seen the deliberate refusal of things like medicine, inadequate food, and perhaps most importantly, we're seeing those results on the ground, but they are very deliberate results on the part of the administration. And I just want to underline, even almost a year before he was elected, Trump was already talking about 20 million people that they were going to go after, which is more than the actual number of undocumented people in the U.S. And just as an aside, I'll say historians debate it, but the Russian gulag that existed formally for a little over 2 decades, they argue over whether was it 18 million or whether it was 20 million that went through it as prisoners. So we are literally talking their ambition is something that size. And the early camps that we're seeing now, the early detention camps, particularly the show camps, like the one that people refer to as Alligator Alcatraz, we see these conditions of actually trying to create harm with the way that the camps are set up. We're already seeing that.
And I saw reporting by NBC News, and that you talked about in your article, your great article that you wrote about We've got a situation where ICE is now acquiring these massive former warehouses like Dachau, and that's why you brought that up, and holding 8,000 detainees at one time. This would be massive. What more can you share about the administration's plan in terms of acquiring what are it's like airplane hangars and just jamming people into them?
So one of the things that I have said is that often when you see a massive, you can recognize a massive concentration camp expansion when everything becomes a question of logistics, right? And right now we are seeing this turn where they are running up against these logistics and they're trying to solve them in really dramatic ways. And when a country is talking about warehousing people,
Mhm.
and what are the logistics of how to do that? That country is in beyond camps or anything else in a very bad place typically. And so I think our democracy is in a bad place that it is created a fertile ground for this with the pre-existing immigration system before Trump even came in, with many other things in our history. But at this point, when it's a question of how you can accommodate the largest number of people with the least amount of care in the least expensive way, we already know what happens. And again, to underline the current facilities, pre-warehousing facilities, we are already hearing of people lying in feces who can't get their medical care. We are hearing of assaults. There have been 3 deaths already in Camp East Montana in Texas. One of them already ruled a homicide at the hands of guards. We have seen children who are losing weight, who are not eating. And there are some 1,000 children out of the 4,000 or so that are detained that we know of. Some 1,000 of them are already being held, have already been held in excess of the 20-day limit that is legally set forth to be able to keep kids in this kind of condition. And again, we're not at an end point, right?
Right.
This is the starting point. And if this is where we're starting, this is where I would say we're already in concentration camp territory. And there's a term I use like we are walking toward Auschwitz. We are a long way from there. But why would you walk in that direction, right? Why would you approximate those conditions?
There's just a couple of cases I've seen recently. One was an Irish national who's been in the country, I think, for 2 decades, married to a U.S. citizen. He's been held since September, just being held. And one is a Palestinian American woman. She's not a U.S. citizen, but she's been living here. She went to Columbia, and she's been in detention for almost a year. Like
She's lost 50 pounds. 50 pounds and has been hospitalized.
Yep.
I mean, that's the conditions of detention. And the Irish guy, I think his name is Seamus Culleton, if I'm right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he, there's so not just that he's in this state, because I do think that there's a number of white Americans who would be concerned about an Irishman that
Right.
this is happening to, but maybe not concerned about other populations, which I think is unfortunate if that's the case. But what he is describing happening to other people as well as to him, the things that he's witnessed in terms of beatings and the conditions in the facilities, it is terrible. And I think that this is another reason why how it exists now and what they're headed toward is horrific. The reason they do this end run around the systems is to be able to do more harm with less oversight. And we are already seeing way less oversight. Oversight in jails is already bad in America. Let me just be clear. We have real serious problems with our carceral system. The goal should not be have less accountability and have less oversight than that. And that's where we already are. And I think we're headed to even less accountability given what they want right now.
And your article gives us some potential coming attractions, which are alarming. We'll get to that in a second. When you heard about I believe it was 2 measles outbreak, there may have been more. I have to be honest on some level, and I know this might seem conspiratorial, but I'm like, you wonder if it's almost like the way the settlers gave Native Americans smallpox blankets. Like, I can't put it past, the reality is I can't put it past this regime. I think it's very unlikely. They release measles because of it's airborne. It can cause horrible damage to people if they don't have vaccinations. But I have to worry about germ warfare being used by this administration because they've dehumanized the migrants to the point where I don't think they're viewed as human beings by the guards.
See, I don't think there even has to be a conspiracy here. It certainly would fit the bill for that, but I think that it's almost worse than that because it's clear from the language of people at the top, particularly the Bovinos, particularly Stephen Miller. They don't care what happens to these people. They want this to be punishment. They want it as a deterrent. I would say that, even Democrats on Capitol Hill, a number of them have gone along for too long with using border detention, these facilities as a deterrent in punitive ways. That has afforded our current president a number of tools by which to do tremendous harm. And it's clear that people like Stephen Miller will be happy to see that disease and that harm spread. But I think the bigger thing of what's happening is that, and this goes to concentration camp history again, when you mix up the same ingredients and you put it in the oven, you get the same cake. And it doesn't even have to be somebody trying to bake a Nazi cake or a Soviet cake or a 1970s Pinochet and Chile cake, right? It's the same ingredients. And I think Americans as a whole should be super worried, because part of the reason we're seeing this measles outbreak, and there's a TB outbreak at another camp as well, part of the reason we're seeing all that is because our own national public health system is being actively destroyed. And I think that's less for conspiracy for some shadowy reason. And I think that is more for money, for people who are going to profit off of the ways that our public health system breaks down. And it's just that the canaries in the coal mine are these people, in fact, in detention. And for those people who don't know a lot about measles, I will tell you, if you are dealing with an undervaccinated or unvaccinated population, measles is a lethal disease. It is incredibly contagious. So we are at some point going to start seeing measles deaths in these detention facilities.
And again, it's all happening on U.S. soil. Now, in your article, you give us some warnings for the future based on the past, which are very instructive. I always look to the past and history. So you talk about the Trump administration is not just taking these actions for border enforcement. The mission has crossed over to explicit ethnic cleansing to entrench political power. Can you share a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. Again, all we have to do is to start with Stephen Miller's own words that America is for, quote, Americans, which apparently for him means white Americans. And this idea that this population should be removed is extremely explicit. We see social media accounts at DHS joking about deporting 100 million people. There is clearly a larger agenda of taking, quote unquote, our country back. And so this is the language that we see, and the way that these people have been dehumanized for years by the first Trump administration, Trump throughout Biden's term, and then now again. This is the textbook language of ethnic cleansing. And the way that it is operating now, and I know people hear about it, but I want you to just take a step back. And we have secret police in masks on the street, crashing into people's cars, taking people who've been here 30 years, taking that poor gentleman who raised 3 sons who served in the Marines, and thank goodness that court order today barred his deportation, beating him up on the street. It is an active attempt to terrorize, and that's a lot of what concentration camps are about as well. But when you look, and just at sheer numbers, for instance, we already have 3 times more people in immigrant detention in the U.S. than the Nazi concentration camp system had 5 years into the Third Reich. We have as many people in detention now as the Nazis had by the time World War II had started in their whole system. Now, Germany had a smaller population, of course, than we do now, but I don't think we should even be in that universe. I don't think that we should aspire to the 20 million of the Russian Gulag. I don't think we should be trying to meet or beat the Nazi numbers. But there's often this period of time in the first 3 to 5 year window when an aspiring authoritarian seizes power, in which people can really make a big difference. And often there is a moment where there is sort of a struggle of whether the country will kind of turn more to just really vicious using the legal system, or keeping this outside system, the camps, to expand those and then try to hold on to rule and have an ongoing terror that way. And we're on the back end of that now. And there's a number of ways that can end, because countries that get to that point usually are pretty unstable. And so sometimes it's foreign interference. We're unlikely to be invaded. The U.S. is unlikely to have a foreign power come and take us over. But often there's some kind of power struggle that happens inside. I think what's most likely in the U.S. to actually have the potential still for the rest of this year, at least, to undo this, is that we are absolutely the freest example of a society overall, speaking of the population in general, we have more options than any of the countries I've studied in over 130 years, 6 continents. We have more ways to act and take action and actually stop this. So when I say how bad it is, I don't want people to feel paralyzed by that. I don't want people to feel hopeless.
And that's a great point. And we'll circle back to that before we end. I'm chatting with Andrea Pitzer, journalist and author of One Long Night, A Global History of Concentration Camps. I'm concerned that there are many people not paying attention. I mean, Trump's approval ratings are falling through the floor right now. And I think there's a reason, even though unemployment on its paper is low, there's an unease around what's going on in this country. At least that's what I hope. But, when you paint a picture right now, if you objectively looked at our country from the outside, armed, masked men walking in the streets who are just rounding people up, that they have immunity because we're told that and they're not charged with any crimes. They're building massive concentration camps. Journalists are being indicted. You have an effort to actually prosecute 6 members of Congress this week. Thankfully, the grand jury said no, but they're not going to give up on it. The Trump administration, this doesn't look like the United States of America. It looks like something else, some other country that may be from history, but this is where we are.
Well, I think we have 2 heritages here politically, right? We have the heritage of Native American genocide. We have the heritage of slavery. We have the heritage of Operation Wetback, as it was called under Dwight Eisenhower, to be really violent and forcibly deporting a lot of migrants over the southern border. But we also have this other heritage that actually has helped end some concentration camp systems around the world and other places, which is this idea of liberty, of freedom, of democracy. And I think that that grim side of U.S. history, as it has been around the world, has really gotten a lot stronger in a lot of places. And I think it makes some of the stakes clear. But I adamantly say that we also have this other heritage, right? And that's the country that we need to aim to. But we can't get there without acknowledging the weaknesses that brought us where we are, because concentration camps don't come out of nowhere. They rise in a country because of things like income inequality, because of prejudice and racism. It takes a long time to make this possible. And so I think that we have to actively share and embrace that vision of a country that is our better side. The moments we have triumphed, the civil rights movement, women voting. I mean, we have to hold on to the liberties that so many people have fought hard for.
Yeah. And you mentioned other countries, obviously the Nazis, we know what happened there. Are there any other examples in more democratic nations that you've seen of concentration camps and how they were able to end? Because obviously with the Nazis, it took the downfall of the Third Reich. And with, Russia, I mean, I guess it continued through Stalin, or did it continue even after
With
Stalin?
the death of Stalin, a lot changed, but obviously still a lot of issues with Russia ever since and today. But the Gulag, the formal Gulag, ended at that point. Yes, it started to taper down.
So are there any lessons that from other countries? And because obviously getting involved in politics here, and what I'm getting at is that enough? Will they do it? Can that do it? Our domestic policy and the way we come out in elections?
Elections alone, I think a lot of people are sitting around kind of waiting they realize people are mad at Trump and unhappy, and they're like, well, the elections will take care of this. But I really want to encourage people that the elections are going to have to be just one tool to undo this. Please do go out and vote. That will be a way to make a huge shift in what's happening. And at the same time, we have to be at work in our communities in other ways, stopping ICE facilities from coming to where we are, paying attention to detention, not letting these toeholds, be made in inroads into this kind of detention, so that your town locally, like Dachau was just the name of the town, right? You don't want your town to be memorialized as a camp in history. And so I encourage people to take action. And later, if you want, I can tell you specific things for that. But in terms of how people have ended it on a bigger scale, if we go back to Pinochet's Chile, right? The mass detention actually was partly stopped by U.S. pressure after there was a killing, an assassination of Orlando Letelier in D.C. The U.S. started pressuring Chile to break up the secret police that they had. But of course, it did continue for a long time. And then it really relied on the people to take up action. And they did not stop demonstrating. They did not, at great risk to themselves, they did not stop secret communications. They began to press back. And eventually they were able to press for a public referendum, which Pinochet mistakenly thought he was going to win. And so, but that took them more than a decade. And it was partly because the power was so completely seized in the beginning. I don't want to be back here every year for a decade with you in the hopes that we might be able to end it. And so that's part of why I'm saying I think this year is the action year by which we still have all this means to talk to each other. Journalists can still speak out even as they're being attacked. We still have a partially functioning court system. And even though sometimes those court orders are ignored in detention, we also see forced accountability from some judges. Liam Conejo Ramos was released. Whatever happens going forward, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was brought home. It is possible to chip away at all this. And I think that we need to be doing it in our communities. Just posting stuff online is not sufficient. You have to go out and actually network. And that might be literally just helping, like, people who are in detention, helping their families out. Right. That might be something through your church. That might be that you find out there's a great project called the Salt Box Project that is identifying all these warehouses around the country. Figure out if one is coming to your area. Talk to your city council, talk to your elected reps, right? There's all these things you can do to start setting up barriers. And there's literally a million things. And if people want to, they can look at my newsletter for my very long lists of things to do. But
that's very helpful. When you look at ICE, does history tell us, and I'm not sure if it does or not, but I'd love to get your opinion on this. Does history tell us, can it be reformed, or does it have to be abolished and a new agency take its place?
I think ICE as exists now and Border Patrol as it exists now, I think both of them have become the sort of Praetorian Guard symbolically of the president. They're too allied with the president. They have to be abolished in their current form. One of the things that I tend to say is the answer to correct response to Dachau was not better training for the guards. ICE as it exists and DHS, Department of Homeland Security, have only existed for a brief period of time in the nation's history. And I think we have to, if people are uncomfortable with the word abolish, then think of it as dismantle. Think of it as diminish. How do you deconstruct that down to something that is not about punishing and targeting a population that can then be used to damage the entire country itself, that same tactic, that same approach? Because it's clear that this model that we have used to get here is incredibly dangerous. And it has happened in other places. Accountability sometimes takes a long time. I think of a woman I talked to in Argentina who was kidnapped, tortured, held indefinitely. I mean, horrific things happened to her under dictatorship there. And she had a blindfold on, and she remembered the pattern of the tile on the floor where she was held because they kept her blindfolded all the time for the very reason that ICE is masked, right? So that there can be no accountability. She remembered that pattern. Years later, after dictatorship fell, they found that floor. They talked to the neighbors who remembered screams from that period. They worked their way through this. They had trials. They brought the generals in. Another man I talked to from Chile actually recognized his he had peeked again under his blindfold and had caught a glimpse of his interrogator. And he managed to, it became a national story of accusing that man in public of what he had done. There will be accountability. The question is, how long will it take before we have it? And I would much rather us do it on the shorter time frame because it is more likely to keep our country stable and give me hope for a country, more likely to have less harm come to people who deserve none of it. I think that we have to really put a stop to what Trump is doing if we don't want it to keep cyclically returning as he did himself.
I mean, we're on the path to the same things that you've studied through history. I mean, if something doesn't change its trajectory, what will be the next thing that we should really be alarmed about if it happens?
I mean, the warehousification of this. We are on the verge of it, but we can still stop a lot of that. But there's two things that have to happen. They have to have more detention beds to be able to lock up more people, and conditions in them will get worse. In addition, they need more agents. They need more secret police. Right now, they can do what they're doing in Minneapolis and in LA and in Chicago. They can do it in a few places at the same time, but they can't do it everywhere, right? And so they are really pushing those numbers, and the shaming of ICE is wonderful that people are doing. The mocking, I mean, some people say, oh, but like, what if they get mad? Well, it's like, they're already mad. They're already doing really bad things. And to make it a shameful thing to be part of that. And I would even go further, like California, I think, is the state that's looking at, if you participate in this, that you cannot hold municipal jobs. You cannot be a teacher. You cannot be a firefighter. I would love to see a bunch of states do that, and also cross index so that they make a compact together that you will lose your future if you participate in this. So there's all kinds of ways we can make it harder and harder, because if they don't get a lot more agents, they also won't be able to do it. So the things to watch for are these warehousing drives successful, and are they able to massively increase the numbers of ICE agents? They've already doubled in the last year. So we need to stop it sooner than later.
That's great about California. I was not aware of that. And I think that's so effective. And I hope other blue states around the country do the same thing and share the information with each other. Before we wrap up, I mean, you've given so many different pieces of advice and prescriptions for us to save our republic and stop the trajectory of where it's going. You mentioned election, though, might not be enough. Well, so if we win the election this year, say Democrats win the House and even the Senate, then what would be the next goal? I mean, obviously the presidency, but anything else we could do as the people to stop this?
So there's a couple things. Yes, first of all, be aware that even if we get the Senate, we can gum up the works. But in terms of passing legislation, there'll still be a veto, which will still hem in how much can actually be accomplished, right? But it will be a huge thing in stopping many things of what's going on. And you have budget things that can happen. You can have clawbacks that might be able to be done depending on the circumstances. And I would say also, but just throwing a wrench in the works would be a huge gain from where we are now. So I think that's really critical and important. I would like to see blue states and Democratic leadership not just figure out how to kind of get by, but to actually propose a vision of a truly democratic America, because people seem extraordinarily hungry for that. 46 people, even before I think it was Liham Conejo Ramos, 46% of Americans, all Americans, were already saying abolish ICE in surveys. There is a hunger for a leadership that imagines something better for the country. And a lot of that can be done even before you can stop a presidential veto. But in addition, I would say do not give up on red states and red state voters in this moment. The economy is getting worse. They are already angry. People disapprove of ICE. More and more Republicans are disapproving of ICE. But more importantly, you have these legislators like Wicker in Mississippi, who just made a call to Kristi Noem to do a NIMBY, like not in my backyard, with one of the warehouses, because people were angry about it. They don't want to be associated with it. I think you will find a lot of Republicans are there. So here's a place where, for once, bipartisanship might actually be a practical good goal for the country and for our democratic values. But there's a million ways that we can work on this. And I think that actively people in those blue states who have not been able to elect the people they want, this is your moment to gather local opposition to this stuff and get those guys to make calls to their friends in the agencies. And if that goes to blue states, then blue states can be working to shut it down too. There's all kinds of ways we can work together.
Well, I really appreciate you laying it out. And what's the website? Where can people go to check out your newsletter, which has a big list of things, and it's really a great reference guide. Very helpful.
So if you go to AndreaPitzer.com, so in the first page there, it will tell you how to subscribe to the newsletter. If you want to read the book about the camps, and there's a lot of other stuff, it's everything you could be looking for if you want more info about this.
Well, my friend, thank you so much for being back on. I know it's difficult and challenging times, and I know it's not going to get easier, and it might even get a little darker, but we're navigating through this now. So I look forward to chatting with you in the future, hopefully about how we've overcome this.
Well, keep up the good work, Dean. We'll get there.
You too. Take care. Have a great day.